Julian in the field here. Today's question is, why hasn't the world burnt down? Because fire only needs three things to take: oxygen, heat, as you can see what's running out here, is fuel. But generally, there's a lot of that to go around, so what's the deal? Because if you've ever seen a large wildfire, the first question that comes to mind isn't really how is this spreading, it's, gosh, how's this thing ever going to stop? But to answer that question, we have to understand what's really burning during a wildfire. Because it's not really wood. Look closely inside something like a wood stove, and you'll see that what's really burning isn't the wood, but the vapor above the wood. And so, in everything from a campfire to a wildfire, what's going on is the fire is actually cooking the wood until it can ignite the vapors. Because the vapors, like a grill, are what really burn. And so back to our original question, which is, how does a wildfire even end? Oxygen, heat, and fuel. Remove any one, and it'll die. First one is heat. Water has an extremely high specific heat. Add some water vapor, and it'll cool it down enough to where the vapors can no longer be produced. The vapors are that fuel. So you lower the temperature, the vapors stop happening, and the fire runs out of fuel. I probably shouldn't have done the water one first. Fire needs oxygen to burn. Now fire consumes oxygen as it's burning. So I put this fire in a sealed container, and as you can see, it's slowly fizzling out. Because as it consumes, well, it made a hole in the top, but you get the idea. Hot and smelly. It didn't consume all the oxygen in there. At around 16% oxygen, the fire will die out. And of course, the last way to remove the fire is to remove its fuel source directly. Except, how do I do that when this thing is hot and so inexorably connected to its fuel source? Oh yeah. And so, how do firefighters do it? Well, in a structure fire, usually firefighters can bring enough water to the party in order to shut it off and cool it down enough to where it stops burning. But in a wildfire, there's usually way too much fire and not enough water for firefighters to be able to cool down the front. And so those videos you see of helicopters coming in and scooping up people's pools, the purpose of that isn't to cool down the fire like in a structure fire. It's to front run the front of the fire and wet all the fuel. So they're cutting off the fuel source, not cooling it down. At our atmosphere's oxygen levels of around 21%, wetting the vegetation is usually enough to get it to stop burning. But in the Permian, when our oxygen was at 30%, fire would be so hot that it would just rip through wet vegetation, no problem. So more oxygen means faster, hotter fire. But it runs the other way too. There are places where water would damage the building just as much as a fire would. Places like museums and data centers. In those places, what they'll do is they'll just keep the atmospheric oxygen levels within the building at 15%. Enough to snuff out any potential fires, but not enough to reduce the amount of oxygen saturation in our blood. Pretty nifty. That's that 16% turned into an entire building. Check it out. Come on. And it's out. So, under 16% and fire doesn't burn. Over 30% and it'll just burn all the vegetation regardless of how wet it is. And for the past 400 million years, our atmosphere has remained between those two numbers. Interesting. Why is that? Believe it or not, the answer is fire. Because when dead plants get buried, the oxygen levels go up. When the oxygen levels go up, fire spreads faster. When fire spreads faster, it burns through the plants before they can get buried, lowering the oxygen levels. Isn't that crazy? That's real science. Which leaves us with fuel. Separating the fire from its fuel is how kids blow out their birthday candles, and how wildfire firefighters stop the fire from spreading. They dig breaks, or they wet the fuel ahead of it so the fire can no longer burn. And that's pretty much how wildfires naturally die down as well. Because a wildfire can only survive so long as it reaches the next thing. And eventually, wildfires just stop reaching the next thing. But there have been cases where the next thing just keeps on coming. In the 1950s, over 1.5 million hectares were burned in Canada because the fire was just burning and nobody really cared to stop it. It burned from June all the way into the fall. And what killed it was basically just the weather. But of course, what happens if there's no weather to separate the fire from its fuel? What if perhaps there's a fire burning underground, where it still had access to some oxygen, but nothing was there to stop it. Well, in Pennsylvania, there's a coal mine that's been burning since the 60s. In Australia, there's an entire mountain that's been burning for over 6,000 years. What's going on is, because they're underground, the access to oxygen is limited, and so the fire smolders. It doesn't burn with an open flame like this. And so when the supply of oxygen is cut off, and the fire smolders, it can burn for a very long time, albeit very slowly. In 6,000 years, that fire under the Australian mountain has only moved 6.5 kilometers. Just like this. Limited oxygen. It takes forever to burn. Oh, oxygen's back. Fire's back burning quick. So the fires that spread the fastest eat through their fuel the fastest and die the fastest. Those that move slow and conserve their fuel don't really burn that fast. Pick your poison. What's that saying? Something, something, burn the brightest? I forget.
Oh, yeah.
Get a cook, yo!